I found out about my wife's affair while refueling my car. Not in some dramatic reveal or a caught-in-the-act moment. Just a text message. One accidental glance. Her phone, left in the cup holder, lit up with a message preview while she went inside the gas station to grab water. Miss you already. Your body still echoes in my hands. I didn't panic. Didn't scream or drop the phone. I stared at that message like a math problem waiting to be solved. We'd been married 11 years. Built a life together. Co-founded a startup that turned into a full-scale logistics firm. I thought I knew her. Thought I could read her the way I read quarterly earnings or client patterns. But that message, that broke something quiet inside me. And it didn't come with instructions on how to fix it. When she got back in the car, I handed her the bottle of water and didn't say a word. I drove home like nothing happened. That silence was the beginning of something darker. You don't need explosions to signal the end of a world. Sometimes all it takes is 7 words and a familiar name you never thought could betray you. Because S was Simon, my business partner, my best man at the wedding, and the godfather to our daughter. The days after weren't real. I went to work. Meetings. Emails. Dinner at home. Laughter. Kisses. Lies. She still touched me the same. Smiled the same. Nothing in her rhythm had changed. But mine had. I started to notice the way she glanced at her phone when she thought I wasn't watching. The way she avoided eye contact just a second too long when I asked about her day. I heard the tiny stutters in her stories. Places that used to have details now came with vague summaries. I started to record everything. Her excuses. The names she mentioned. The timelines. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Taxes, just in case anyone snooped. 2 weeks later, I confronted Simon. Not with rage. Not even in private. I waited until the quarterly board meeting, surrounded by investors, advisors, and department heads. I asked him one question. Simon, how long have you been sleeping with my wife? The room collapsed into silence. His face went pale, but it was her reaction I was watching from across the table. How her lips tightened, and she looked down at her notes like she'd been waiting for this storm and hoping to ride it out quietly. Simon stammered something about misunderstandings, but the damage was done. I stood up, thanked the board, and walked out. Not because I was weak, but because the next move had to be made with surgical precision. See, betrayal isn't about emotion. It's about leverage. They made the first move in the dark. I was about to flip on the floodlights. The next morning, she told me she wanted space. Said she was confused and emotionally overwhelmed. Claimed nothing physical had happened, but she felt seen by him. That was supposed to make it better. I agreed to give her space. I even moved into the guest house. What she didn't know was that I owned the server she used for email. I had installed the cameras on the property. I knew every password she ever used because I had helped her set them. She wanted to lie inside my empire? Then I would be the god she tried to trick. That week, I learned everything. The hotels, the weekends, the cover stories, the fake meetings, and worst of all, their plans. They weren't just having an affair. They were plotting a buyout. A hostile push to get me voted off the board using her shares and his silent majority. That wasn't just betrayal. That was war. I started to act broken. I canceled meetings. Stopped shaving. Made a few public mistakes to make the board worry. Simon stepped in to help, like the opportunistic coward he was. Meanwhile, I shifted assets. Quietly called in favors. Brought in an external auditor to examine executive decisions going back 6 months. Turns out Simon had been siphoning funds through a shell consultancy, using our own money to pay for their secret life. That was the final nail. I brought everything to the board. Numbers, emails, surveillance logs, financial reports. And then I played the audio. Once we push him out, it's ours. He'll fold like always. Just smile and act like you still love him. That was her voice. I didn't ask for applause. I just waited. By the end of that week, Simon was out. Lawsuit pending. Accounts frozen. And she came home to silence. To a divorce filing. To custody papers. To a non-disclosure agreement with teeth. But the part that surprised even me was this. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt empty. Like they hadn't just stolen my trust. They'd stolen my ability to feel anything at all. And I wasn't done yet. Some betrayal scream. Others whisper for years. Hers was the quiet kind. The kind that lived behind practiced smiles, innocent questions, and bedtime routines that continued like nothing had happened. That's what made it dangerous. She wasn't just hiding something from me. She had hidden something in me. Doubt. And doubt, once planted, grows into obsession. After the fallout at the board, Simon vanished from the city. The press release said personal reasons. Internally, we called it what it was, removal. His assets were frozen pending litigation. The executive team distanced themselves. Everyone acted shocked. But in business, loyalty is negotiable. They were loyal to power. And now, I was the only one left holding it. But power meant nothing if I didn't feel safe in my own home. She stayed in the main house for the sake of our daughter. I let her believe that. I wanted her to think I was too hurt, too exhausted to fight. I wanted her to think I was collapsing. Every morning, she made breakfast like always. Every evening, she asked about my day. Once, she reached across the table and touched my hand like she was testing the temperature of a memory. I didn't flinch. I nodded. I played along. That was the key, not reacting. Because I wasn't interested in punishment. I was interested in consequences. She still had a controlling share of the company, something she'd earned legitimately when we started the firm. I had no intention of robbing her of it. I wasn't here to steal anything back. But she had no idea that I'd begun acquiring voting rights through silent proxies. Former competitors, angry ex-partners, people she'd crossed on her way up, people with grudges and short memories for favors. 2 weeks after Simon's exit, she approached me in the garden while I was reviewing mock-ups for a new facility. "We need to talk," she said carefully. "I've made mistakes. I don't expect forgiveness. But we can fix this. You and I. The company. The family." She didn't apologize. She negotiated. I nodded slowly and said, "Then we should rebuild. Together." That night, I sent an encrypted folder to the district attorney's office, containing her emails, her internal memos, a complete timeline of her complicity in Simon's financial scheme. I didn't push for charges. That would have been petty. I just made sure the authorities knew who'd signed what. She started noticing the changes about a month in. Contracts she'd championed were redirected to other divisions. Clients stopped returning her calls. Her access to executive dashboards was quietly limited, justified through internal restructuring. She came to me in frustration. "You said we'd fix this." "We are," I said. "But that takes time. Trust needs time." I smiled when I said it. She didn't. That night, she tried to log into our old shared vault. Password changed. No recovery email. I saw her pacing the hallway from the security feed in the guest house. Her silence was finally growing heavy. I knew the time would come when she'd realize she wasn't in control anymore. It came on a Friday. She was hosting a pitch to a venture group we'd courted for months. She had prepped for it like it was her comeback tour. But when she connected her laptop, the investor's legal rep interrupted with a quiet announcement. "We've decided to withdraw based on unresolved compliance concerns." She looked at me across the room, that sharp panic in her eyes, masked behind corporate poise. I didn't blink. She didn't know that the rep was one of the silent proxies I'd flipped weeks ago. Not with bribes. With truth. About her. About Simon. About the real cost of betting on someone who confuses ambition with treason. That night, she knocked on my door. No acting. No performance. Just tired eyes and a question. "Are you trying to erase me?" I didn't answer at first. Then, "I'm just giving you the freedom you wanted. I'm not fighting you. I'm letting you walk into your own decisions." "And what about our daughter?" "She'll know the truth. One day. But for now, she just needs a stable home." Her silence told me everything. This wasn't guilt. This was consequence catching up. A few days later, she received a letter from the State Revenue Department. Simon had failed to report income properly, and her digital signature was on 2 filings. Maybe she'd signed it blindly. Maybe she didn't care. It didn't matter now. Her voice cracked when she told me, "They're threatening to freeze my accounts." "Do you need help?" I asked. She looked at me like I was a stranger. That's when I knew I'd won. Because the man she'd betrayed wasn't asking that question to manipulate or punish. I just wanted to see what she'd say. "I'll figure it out," she said quietly. And she walked out of the room like someone carrying a version of herself that finally felt heavy. Some stories don't end with explosions. Some end with silence. The kind of silence where the truth hangs in the air like smoke after a fire. Invisible, but suffocating. The kind that turns a house into a courtroom and breakfast into a negotiation. She stayed. For now. But I could already feel the distance growing. And not the kind you measure in steps. The kind you measure in damage. The hardest part wasn't watching her lie. It was realizing how easy it had become for her. 3 months after Simon disappeared and the board stabilized under my direction, life outside looked normal. But inside, everything had shifted. We didn't fight. There were no yelling matches, no slammed doors, no screaming confessions. Just quiet avoidance and polite distance. But behind the silence, I was dismantling everything she had helped build. Not out of revenge. Out of necessity. You don't leave cancer in the body and hope it behaves. You cut it out. The Department of Revenue opened a formal investigation. She tried to downplay it, called it routine. But the tension in her shoulders whenever she checked the mail told a different story. Her lawyers reached out to mine for a resolution. I gave them exactly what she gave me. Vague answers, delayed responses, and broken promises. It wasn't about punishing her anymore. It was about letting her feel what it's like when someone rewrites the rules mid-game. She had done it with emotion. I did it with precision. Her equity stake was frozen as part of the audit. She couldn't touch her shares, couldn't leverage her position, couldn't move money without triggering alerts. My name wasn't on the freeze, but it didn't need to be. I had enough quiet influence behind the scenes. She started canceling meetings, missing events. Our daughter asked questions, but I shielded her. I told her, Mom's just under pressure. And it was true. Pressure reveals character. And hers was beginning to crack. One night, I walked into the kitchen and found her holding a half-packed suitcase. No panic, no tears, just exhaustion. I can't breathe here, she said. Then go, I replied. No one's stopping you. She didn't. She stood there, waiting for something, permission, maybe, or a promise I'd never give again. You're enjoying this, aren't you? No, I said. I'm surviving it. She left the suitcase, went back upstairs. That's when I knew she was no longer capable of deciding her own path. Every choice she made now came through the lens of guilt, fear, or self-preservation. Good. Let her live where she once placed me. The case against Simon moved forward. Depositions, discovery, and media interest grew. It became clear that he had falsified not only expense reports, but vendor contracts using ghost companies. Her name appeared in enough emails to cast doubt. Her defense? She trusted him. That was her whole argument. How ironic. The trust she had weaponized against me was now her only defense against legal collapse. But this wasn't the worst part. The worst part came from our daughter. One night, after dinner, she walked into my office. She held up her tablet and said, Is Mom in trouble? I didn't lie. Not anymore. Yes. Did she do something bad? She made choices that hurt people. She nodded once. Not confused, just sad. Is that why you don't smile at her anymore? I said nothing. She says you're trying to ruin her. That made me pause. I leaned forward and said carefully, I'm not trying to ruin her. I'm trying to protect what's left. Of what? Of us. She hugged me. And in that moment, I realized I hadn't just been trying to dismantle betrayal. I was trying to rebuild trust for her, for what kind of man she would one day believe her father had been. The next morning, my lawyer forwarded me a document, emergency motion for partition of assets. Her legal team was preparing to force a sale of company shares to pay potential fines. A desperate move. She never asked me directly, but I knew what she wanted. Settle quietly, offload liability, walk away with something salvageable. I denied it. 2 days later, she showed up in my office. No appointment. No pretense. I need your help, she said. You're 3 months too late. You've made your point. I get it. You win. This was never a game. She stepped closer. Then why does it feel like checkmate? I stood slowly. Because you underestimated the difference between damage and consequence. Damage is what happens when you lose control. Consequence is what happens when you think you'll never be caught. She didn't respond. In the end, she didn't leave with a dramatic exit. There were no slammed doors or final accusations. She stayed. Out of obligation. Out of fear. Maybe even out of habit. But she was gone long before that. I watched her drift through days like a ghost in a house she no longer recognized. And I didn't hate her. I didn't love her. I simply endured her. The real punishment wasn't financial. It wasn't legal. It was irrelevance. Once, she'd been the most important part of my world. Now, she was just another lesson I had to teach myself not to repeat. A few weeks later, the SEC sent notice. Her name was cleared of fraud, but negligence remained on record. No jail time. No charges. But her professional license would be suspended for a year pending review. She asked if I could speak on her behalf as a character witness. I didn't answer, because some silences speak louder than any testimony ever could. She left on a Tuesday morning without telling anyone. No speech. No note. No goodbyes to our daughter. Just disappeared between 2 appointments on the calendar that no longer meant anything. I noticed when I heard the front gate open on the security app and never saw her name on the school pickup list again. I didn't call. I didn't chase. I didn't need to. Because everything she could have taken with her had already been stripped away. Reputation, position, trust. What remained was mine. And what left was never coming back clean. Our daughter didn't ask where she was that night. She didn't ask the next night either. On the 3rd day, she knocked on my office door with the same quiet calm she always carried when the world around her was shifting. Is Mom gone for good? I turned off the monitor and faced her. There was no point lying. She already knew. Yes. Is she okay? I don't know. She nodded. Looked down. Then, in a voice more mature than her years. Can we stop pretending now? I had to leave the room for a moment. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because I realized how long she'd been waiting for us to be honest. The lawyers confirmed what I already expected. She'd withdrawn her name from every legal partnership tied to our company, forfeited her equity in exchange for full indemnity from future claims, and signed a gag order. The exit was clean, cold, and final. The only thing she asked for was that I don't destroy her personally in the press. I agreed. Not because I cared for her dignity, but because it wasn't necessary. You don't bury what's already forgotten. Weeks passed, then months. Her absence didn't create peace. It created space. Real space. Not just the physical kind, but the emotional vacuum that demanded something new to fill it. That's when the challenges started coming from the outside. Competitors saw the headlines and assumed weakness. Partners wondered if the restructuring was a sign of instability. A rival firm launched a campaign mirroring our pitch decks down to the typography. And then came the lawsuit, filed anonymously, but clearly orchestrated by a former vendor with ties to Simon. The accusation? Breach of contract and unfair business practices. It was weak on merit, but dangerous in optics. One wrong headline, and we'd be back in crisis mode. I didn't panic. I prepared, because betrayal teaches you that threats never announce themselves. They come from those you thought were done with you. The investigation stretched on. Legal meetings, depositions, document recovery. I worked around the clock, ate in my car some days, slept in the office when I had to. Not out of fear, out of duty. Because when everyone assumes you've already lost something, your wife, your partner, your public image, they also assume you're out of fight. I wasn't. If anything, I was finally free to fight properly. No distractions, no diplomacy, no pretending. My daughter noticed. You're working more now, she said one night over dinner. Just for a while. Because of that lawsuit. Yes. Will they take our house? No, they won't take anything. She looked at me like she was measuring the weight of that promise. Then, good, because I don't want to move again. That word, again, hit me harder than anything in the courtroom had. She'd already processed the house as temporary, the life we had as transitional. That wasn't her fault. That was mine. I'd been focused on restoring structure and forgotten to rebuild the parts that mattered. So I made a change. For the first time in years, I let the business run without my full attention. I trusted my team, gave real responsibility, held fewer meetings, took my daughter to school every morning for a month straight. It wasn't redemption. It was recalibration. I wasn't trying to prove I was a better man than the one she'd betrayed. I was trying to become the man my daughter wouldn't have to recover from. Eventually, the lawsuit crumbled. The judge dismissed it with prejudice, citing lack of evidence and intent to defame. We countersued. Quietly. The settlement was handled off record. No headlines. Just like I wanted. Not all wins need applause. Some just need closure. It was late April when I got the letter. Handwritten. No return address. But I recognized the slant of the letters instantly. It was from her. Just a few lines. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect anything. But I wanted you to know I never hated you. I just didn't know how to stop wanting more. I hope you and our daughter are doing well. I hope one day she can understand. I didn't reply. I burned it. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. Because some things should be remembered only long enough to never be repeated. My daughter never asked about her again. Not once. Instead, she started asking questions about the business. About what I did. About why I did it. One evening, after school, she said, "Do you like what you do?" Most days. Even after everything. Especially after everything. She nodded thoughtfully. Maybe I want to do something like that one day. But, not the parts with lawyers. We laughed. A real laugh. The kind that wasn't just release, but recovery. People always assume the hardest part is the collapse. They're wrong. The hardest part is what comes after, when there's no one left to blame, no enemy to hunt, no betrayal to outmaneuver. Just the quiet. The long stretch of days where you realize survival is only the beginning, and rebuilding demands a different kind of strength. I had no plans beyond the reckoning. No blueprint for what to do when the war was over. For so long, my every decision had been in reaction to deception, to power plays, to the ghosts of people who once stood beside me. Now they were gone, and I was still standing. But standing isn't the same as living. My daughter grounded me. She always had, but now it became something conscious. She was older than her age in ways I wish she weren't. Divorce does that. Scandal does that. Silence does that. She asked real questions now. About our family. About right and wrong. She no longer accepted half answers. She was watching me, not just as a parent, but as a man deciding who he would become now that no one was forcing his hand. We had a routine. Mornings together. Evenings for homework. I taught her how to ask better questions, and she taught me how to answer without hiding behind strategy. The company was stable, profitable, more streamlined than it had ever been. I sat in fewer meetings. Let better people lead. And for the first time, I saw it for what it really was. Not a monument to control, but a system that could evolve without needing my hands on every lever. And that's when she returned. Not my ex-wife. Someone else. Emily Green had been a compliance officer at one of our partner firms. I remembered her as efficient, thorough, and quiet. The kind of person who remembered everything and spoke only when it mattered. We'd crossed paths during a joint audit 3 years earlier. Back then, I hadn't thought much beyond the report in her hands. Now, she was leading a multi-regional ethics task force, and our company had been selected for a pilot study on executive accountability. Irony, apparently, has a long memory. The meeting was straightforward. She asked clear questions. I gave transparent answers. There was no tension, no undertone. Just two professionals in a room talking about systems and safeguards. But something shifted near the end. "I've followed your firm's transition," she said, matter of fact. "It's rare to see a company recover from internal collapse without external takeover." "I didn't rebuild it for optics," I said. "I rebuilt it because my daughter was watching." She studied me for a moment, then nodded once. Nothing more. That night, I thought about her more than I should have. Not romantically, just as a mirror. Someone who'd seen the before, the during, and the after, and didn't flinch. Weeks passed. We had a few more meetings. Some calls. Slowly, what started as procedural became conversational. She never asked personal questions directly, but she noticed details. When I spoke about long nights or school pickups, she listened in a way that made me feel like I wasn't being studied, but understood. One day she said, "You don't carry resentment. Not even when you talk about her." I paused, not sure what she was looking for. "It's not resentment," I said. "It's recognition." She showed me the version of myself I never want to become. She didn't reply right away. Then, most people don't admit that. They just blame and move on. Blame is a luxury. I had a kid to raise. That was the end of that conversation. But something settled between us that never quite went away. One evening, my daughter asked, "Are you lonely?" She said it like she was asking about the weather. A simple observation, not an accusation. Sometimes, I admitted. "Would it be weird if you weren't?" "I guess not." She nodded and returned to her book. But I thought about that moment for days. Because she was right. It would be strange not to feel the echo of what was lost. Not the person, just the weight of having trusted someone with everything and watching them turn that gift into leverage. Emily wasn't filling a void. She was reminding me that it was okay to build something again, even if I wasn't sure where it might lead. Eventually, I invited her to a team dinner. Not a date, not a signal, just a gesture. She came, said hello to everyone, talked shop, left without lingering. But the next day, she sent me a message. "Thank you. It's rare to see integrity without performance. You've done more than rebuild. You've reset the terms." I read that twice. Because it wasn't praise. It was permission. This isn't a love story. At least not yet. This is the part no one tells you about revenge stories. The aftermath. The stretch of days when you have to become more than what your pain made you. When you realize the real victory isn't in what you destroy. It's in what you have the courage to build next. I'm still learning how to live without fire in my chest. Still waking up some mornings expecting another war. But there's quiet now. Not empty. Just still. And in that stillness, I've started to hear something I thought was lost forever. Hope. You don't notice legacy when you're building it. Not at first. It's not in the board meetings or contracts. It's in the quiet questions your child asks, in the decisions no one sees you make, in the way people speak about you when you're not in the room. For years, my life had been about control, managing fallout, eliminating risk, responding to betrayal with strategy. But lately, the questions had changed. My daughter didn't ask about courtrooms anymore. She asked about vision, about ethics, about ownership. She was 14 when she came to me with her first idea. "Why don't we invest in smaller logistics startups? Because most of them burn out before they scale. Then we mentor the ones worth saving. Give them infrastructure. Let them grow inside the system you already built." It wasn't a school project. It was a plan. She had graphs, notes, a list of companies we hadn't noticed yet. I didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. That weekend, we sat in my office and reviewed her pitch deck. She talked about sustainability, regional gaps in distribution, founder burnout. She wasn't guessing, she was studying. At the end, she said, "I don't want to inherit something. I want to build something with you." That hit harder than any betrayal ever had. Because it wasn't about ego. It was about purpose. She wasn't just watching anymore. She was preparing. We started small, 2 regional pilot programs. She shadowed every step. Due diligence, risk profiling, founder interviews. She had the patience to listen and the confidence to question people twice her age. But more than that, she had balance. She didn't operate from anger or fear. She hadn't grown up trusting blindly, but she didn't expect failure either. She had seen what betrayal did to a person, and she had chosen not to let it define her. Sometimes she'd ask about the past, never directly, always through the lens of what would you do differently? Would you have forgiven her if she'd told the truth first? Maybe. But truth told under pressure isn't the same as truth chosen freely. Is that why you didn't forgive her? I didn't forgive her because she never stopped protecting her version of the story. She understood, not with bitterness, but clarity. And that was the difference. She wasn't carrying my pain. She was learning from it without wearing it. Emily remained part of our professional orbit. She didn't push. She didn't linger. But she showed up when it mattered. Once during a vendor dispute that nearly tanked a licensing deal, and again when a government audit flagged a former executive's prior misconduct. Each time, she handled things with precision and calm. My daughter respected her long before she realized I did too. One afternoon, the 3 of us sat in a planning session reviewing next quarter's compliance framework. After the meeting, my daughter turned to me and asked, "Is she the kind of person you'd trust again?" The question was surgical. I thought about it before answering. Yes, because she never asked for it. She earned it quietly. That night, my daughter sent me a message from upstairs. Just 5 words. "So, don't keep waiting forever." The next time I saw Emily, we had coffee after a meeting. No pressure. No agenda. She asked how my daughter was handling the shift into leadership. I told her the truth. She's better at this than I was at her age. She doesn't see loyalty as something to demand. She sees it as something to build. Emily nodded. She didn't get that from nowhere. I smiled. She got it from watching people make mistakes. There was no declaration that followed. No sudden romantic pivot. Just an understanding. What we were building, quietly, patiently, was something more valuable than vindication. Months passed. The pilot program succeeded. One of the startups we mentored landed a major regional contract, doubling revenue in 6 months. My daughter led the closing call. I didn't say a word. I just watched. She thanked the founders, outlined next steps, and signed off with a calm professionalism that didn't need applause. Later that night, she handed me a folder labeled Phase 2. Inside was a list of nonprofits focused on underserved communities in the logistics chain: rural truckers, warehouse contractors, local distributors. Legacy isn't just about scale, she said. It's about reach. About who gets to be part of the win. That was when I knew this story wasn't mine anymore. The company was still under my name, but its spirit had changed. It no longer carried the scent of war. It wasn't reactive. It wasn't angry. It was focused, inclusive, measured. Emily came aboard officially as an ethics advisor. Not because we needed to fill a slot, but because the company needed someone who could challenge it from the inside with integrity, and she had never once asked for access. That's how I knew she could be trusted. One night, after dinner, my daughter asked, "Would you do it all again?" What part? The fight, the silence, the revenge. I looked at her and said what I hadn't admitted even to myself. Only if it led me here. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew.